Let's be consistent.
Welcome to another episode of The Key to Consistency. I am your host, Rakia Collins, and on today's episode, we're going to be exploring how consistent leadership practices drive organizational success. And so, before we dive into today's topic, I do want to handle one quick housekeeping item that the podcast schedule will change ever so slightly. Rather than posting on Mondays and Fridays, we'll be shifting to posting weekly on Monday mornings. So, just wanted to give you guys that quick heads up before we dive into today's topic. So, when we think about, as humans, we think about an organization and we think about what makes an organization successful. It always starts at the top, right? Like leadership, accountability, consistency, it all starts at the top. And when that is effective and works well at the top, it certainly works its way all the way down. Whether we think about this through the lens of society as a whole, being that I am based in America, if we look at the White House, which is where presidential decisions are made, Congress, Senate, all that good stuff. That's where they're based. The decisions, for good or for bad, because they can make some bad decisions as well. All of those decisions that come from those individuals drive the United States as a whole, because those are the individuals that we've entrusted to, make decisions on our behalf. And so when we think about leadership practices and we think about organizational success, I don't want you to skip over this week's episode because you think that it doesn't apply to you, right? When we think about what an organization is, I want to start by giving the definition of what it is because I think you'll find that it's a lot more applicable to you than you may think. So, an organization is an organized body of people with a particular purpose, especially a business, society, or an association, right? And so, of course, you could have a lot of different associations, people rallying around great causes, whether it's to save the animals, to save the dolphins, to get, some of the pollution out of our oceans. There are tons of different associations. Of course, there are tons of different businesses. And of course, based on where you live, you'll be exposed to a certain society as well. But I do want to focus on the first part of our definition because I think that is where we can see an organization is applicable to all of us, right? So the first part of our definition was an organized body of people with a particular purpose. So does that mean that a family is an organization? Does that mean that if you are a caregiver, you are an organization? I would have to argue and say yes, because you are a people, which is just more than one person, and you are organized for a particular purpose. And so, even if some of the examples I give during today's episode is not directly applicable and fit to the continuity of your situation, I would encourage you to think about where in your life are you a leader? And what can you do in your leadership in order to drive your organization's success? Right? And so the first thing we're going to talk through as we get into today's topic is as a leader and, understanding that we all want to drive our organization success, whether we're thinking business, whether we're thinking family, whatever we're thinking about. Let's start with the first things first to get the elephant out of the room. What does success look like in the context of your organization? In the context of your family life, what does success look like? Does it look like, hey, we got everybody to school, we got to work, we came back, we had a great day, we didn't have any arguments in the house? What do you constitute as success? When you go into your job, do you constitute success as, hey, I was able to get through all of my deliverables today, right? So I think before we can even dive into how your leadership can play a role in better organizing and driving your organization's success, we have to make sure we understand what does success look like first, so we can understand what we are trying to achieve. So hopefully you kind of taken some time to think through, what success means to your organization. And from there, now that we know kind of, what does that success look like for us, we can say, okay, the leadership that you are presenting in your organization, the one of the first questions I want you to ask yourself is my leadership, fair across the board? Am I holding the people in my organization to the same standard that I would hold myself? Right? And I do want to unpack that a little bit, talking first about accountability, because that can go either way. You can hold yourself to a very high standard, and you can lower that standard to those around you, right? Or it can be the inverse. You can have a low standard for yourself, but want to have a higher standard for everyone around you. We can think about this from a family perspective. When you are the head of your home, whether you are, a single mother and you have kids, or if you are a father and you're leading your family, what about your leadership will other people in your family say? Meaning, would they say, if asked by a stranger, is your father, is your mother, is the person that runs your home, do you look at them and does their leadership display the same consistent accountability for everyone in the home? Or is it not that way? Do you find that depending on the situation, depending on the child at fault, depending on, whatever occurred, they may switch up and not apply those same consistent policies and procedures to you as they would to other people, right? You want to make sure that when we think about how your leadership is going to be viewed, that it comes across as accountable across the board. The reason why that is so important is because, especially if we continue with this family example, when you have young ones who are looking up to you and looking at you, they, whether they consciously realize it or not, are taking their understanding of the world from you. You provide them with the baseline. And of course, as they get older and they get exposed to different things, they're going to be, seeing other things and being exposed to other things. But your leadership and your example is going to be their baseline. And speaking as someone who never thought I would say that, being that I am in my late 20s, yes, growing up, I was exposed to my parents' baseline of what it meant to be accountable and what it meant to be fair. And going to high school, going to college, you do get exposed to other things. But I can tell you, as a person in her late 20s, that you end up always in some shape, form, or fashion circling back to your baseline, because that is the first thing that you were exposed to. Now, if you were exposed to a negative baseline or a baseline that you don't perceive to be what you want, you can absolutely overlay your childhood baseline with other consistent, better practices that you've adopted from your environment. But I want to emphasize that point to say that if you are in a position to be able to provide an effective, consistent example of what it means to be accountable and fair to a young person earlier on in life, that is something that they will absolutely keep with them as they continue to walk through life. When we think about, what it means to be consistent in your leadership, I really want to focus on women for a second, speaking as a woman, because I know depending on where you fall, right? You may fall on the side that says, you know, as a woman, I am equal to and have the same rights as a man, right? If he can do it, I can do it too, right? Or you could fall on the other side of the track, the more traditional side of the track, to say, while you don't necessarily, look at yourself as equal to a man in that right, you look at yourself and say, as a human, I have the ability to do everything that he does, but I'll have a level of discernment internally to say, just because I can does not mean that I should, right? And I want to focus on how women, based on your philosophical beliefs, can drive effective leadership in your home as well. Because just because you are a woman and irrespective of how your home is structured, you have a role as well as the man would have a role to drive and help keep that leadership on one accord if you have young ones in your home. What does that look like? That looks like, well, if mom says one thing and if dad says another thing, well, now the kids have two different examples of what it means to be accountable and to be fair, right? So making sure that as a woman, again, whether you are the decision maker in your home or whether you are not, you have a role to play in how this is presented in your family life. It is not just a situation where, you can just idly do nothing, because you will have, and I'm raising my hand because I was one of those children who would go talk to mom and then go talk to dad because I was trying to figure out who would give me exactly what I wanted, right? And so, women, I do want to encourage you guys that we do have a leadership role to play, irrespective of how our family is structured, whether we go and we make the decision with our husband, we go to our husband and kind of, powwow together, or if, you just make the decision yourself, like however your family unit is structured, just know that being accountable and being fair and being that on a consistent basis is important to your family as well. Today's episode is brought to you by the merch shop at thekeytoconsistency.com. I would encourage you to visit our merch shop to see if there's anything that piques your interest. One of the easiest ways to be consistent is to be visually reminded that you are on a mission. You are going to be consistent. So whether you pick up a phone case or you pick up a t-shirt, we have something for you. Again, that is www.thekeytoconsistency.com. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Awesome. So, the next thing that I want to talk through with you guys is going to be how fair decision making, having that clear, consistent communication, and lastly, setting realistic expectations is going to help you drive your organizational success. And I want to take a different turn from the first segment of our podcast. I want to focus this example on more of a business lens and not so much on the family side of things. If you, are a person of, I'll say you have the privilege to be able to manage other people in your day-to-day job, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are a 9 to 5 manager, senior manager, director, etc. You have people that look to you for leadership and for guidance. One thing that you want to make sure of is that you are making consistent, effective decisions, right? Your decisions, if one person proposes an idea to you and the other person proposes an idea to you, as a manager, you now have two different team members that are proposing solutions to you to a particular problem, right? It is important that we evaluate the ideas and the proposals and we don't evaluate the people themselves. And I want to emphasize that because as someone who, we talked about it before on an earlier podcast, but as a person who's transitioning into senior management in my company, I have to be cognizant of, throughout like the quarters, throughout the months, I'll sometimes get proposals from my team for, new and better ways to do things, right? It is important that just because someone provides you with an idea, that you don't necessarily look at them and say, huh, well, you were a slacker in Q1. Now you want to come in Q2 and you want to provide all of these amazing ideas. And like, you want to take the idea itself and the proposals themselves, and you want to look at them, the ideas themselves. You don't want to evaluate the people submitting the ideas to you, because what that looks like is, now if the idea from person A is an excellent idea, but it came from someone whose work ethic, who may be late, who may not necessarily, show themselves or present themselves in a way that you personally agree with, you could really write off a great idea for your organization because of your personal preferences, right? And so when you are in a leadership role from a business perspective, you want to make sure that you are, getting those ideas and those proposals from your team members and truly evaluating them based on the ideas themselves and not necessarily the person that is submitting the ideas. Because we all know, as humans, we have some inherent biases that we like things a certain way, we want to see things done a certain way, and if those things are not done the way that we'd like them to be done, that certainly can put us in a bad space. But we just want to make sure that from a business perspective, as much as possible, we are distancing ourselves from our internal biases and really applying that fair decision making across the board. When we think about, how we, work with our colleagues at work, make sure, and this is what I try to do, that I hold my team to a standard that I did not set. And I know that that may sound kind of counterintuitive, but of course, every workplace has policies, guidelines, and established procedures, right? So when I'm evaluating someone, we do like mid-year evals, we do year-end evals as well. So when I am evaluating them, I am not evaluating them based on how I feel. I am evaluating them based on, did you meet the standard that is set by the organization, right? Because this isn't, the workplace is very different from your home life, in the sense that in my workplace, I don't set the guidelines, the criteria that needs to be followed. That was set before me and it'll be there after me. I am here to just make sure that everyone on my team hits these standards. And having standards that are set outside of me actually setting them is certainly helpful, because now I have an unbiased standard to say, hey, it says X. Did you do X or no? Awesome. It takes a lot of that stress off of me, because now I'm just looking at if you met the criteria or not. I'm not looking at it from the lens of, man, I really like this person, but what evidence do I have to show that this person did? If I have to do all of that, you didn't meet the standard, right? And so hopefully that helps some managers out there when you think about, your own, way that you lead your team, making sure that we hold our team to standards that we did not set. Because if we hold them to those standards, we know that those standards, one, were not set by us. They were set by the organization. The organization standards are going to help increase overall productivity, and it's going to help overall the company achieve its goals. And so I would encourage you as managers to make sure that, even if you disagree, even if you say, well, Rakia, no, I do have personal standards for my team, just make sure that those personal standards are set, and that they are, as my father would say, set in stone, meaning they do not shift. They do not go and sway with the wind based on how you feel when you walk into work that day, or if you don't have if you don't walk into work, if you work from home, when you log on that day, that your standards that you set for your team are set in stone and they know what to expect. And then, of course, lastly, when we think about leadership from a business perspective, we have to think about setting those realistic expectations, right? Do not, do not compare how you were working back when you were this person's age, when you were in a position like this person, compared to what it is today. It is not the same. It is absolutely not the same. We want to make sure that when we set our expectations for our team, that those expectations are the same. They are realistic. They are measurable, right? And I cannot stress realistic enough, because oftentimes when you are communicating to people that report to you, you have to make sure that you communicate in a manner that is clear and effective, right? And I want to give an example, because in my day to day, I realized that I thought I was being clear because I was the person that was communicating. But of course, when you are the person that's communicating, you naturally think everything I'm saying is clear. Why? Because you know what you expect that outcome to look like. Versus when you give that to someone else, if you don't clearly lay out the agenda, if you don't clearly lay out what you expect, that person may not get it. That person may give you an output that you were not expecting, because it's like, what did you expect me to do? Like, you gave me partial, solutions. You didn't give me clear procedures. And coming from the auditing world, I used to be an external auditor. It is very clear as an auditor, oftentimes, your instructions. You are to go into this organization, you are to take a sample of X from whatever fiscal year, and you are to audit it and make sure that it was, those policies, those procedures, that cash, whatever it is, was being accounted for correctly, right? And so for me, I remember giving someone who reported to me a particular task to perform, and I thought the instructions were, I'm talking crystal clear. You couldn't miss it. But they weren't crystal clear. And when I got the actual item that I was going to get from that person, when I got that back, I was like, oh, wow, like this was nothing like what I was expecting. And by nothing, let me be fair, it might have been, I'd say 70% of the way there, right? But what I realized was I was expecting something from this person because I thought the communication was clear, and it wasn't clear. And so now for all of my team, what I do is, when I am delegating a task that I used to perform, but like when I did my recent shift from manager to senior manager, the person coming after me, rather than I certainly do have written policies and procedures of some of the things I used to do, but I also now hop on a Zoom call and have weekly training sessions to say, hey, this is what I used to do, at this time of the month, and video call and record the call and walk them through, hey, this is how I got to this output, and this is, the baseline, right? This is what, the people in management, this is what they're used to seeing, because this is what I used to produce. Now, if you want to take this and you want to jazz it up and make it better, have at it. But at minimum, this is the baseline standard. And so I've personally I found better ways to be consistent by ensuring that if I'm translating something for someone, rather than just giving them a Word document with policies or procedures or what they need to do, at the end, I always say, please feel free to hop on a call with me and book time with me if something is unclear. Like before, it would just be, hey, here's the document, here's what you can follow, because that's enough for me, right? But I began to realize that there are different people in this world that you work with, Rakia. Everybody does not take in information the same way. Some people are more visual. They need to see where you are, what did you point at, what did you click on. They need to see all of that, which is totally fine. We're different humans with different makeups, right? So for me, making sure that I still stick to what I'm used to, which is that nicely typed out Word document, but also offering a call for those people that are more visual, more audio, like that they need the visuals to go along with that document, to make them to just to really make it click and make it make sense, right? So hopefully you guys are able to get something from that business example, that whether you should, rethink how you communicate with your team, even asking your team like, hey, and I know sometimes constructive feedback is not the easiest thing to receive, but maybe it's outside of your mid years or your year in evals, and you just want your team to get a feel for, how am I doing? Like, is there anything that I can do better, that I should do better, that you don't necessarily, agree with or like? Because even though there may be some things that you can't necessarily change because they may not come from you, they may just be, company policies. There could be some things in there that you learn that you didn't even realize you were doing because you are inside the picture and you're asking people who are looking at the frame and they're looking at the picture, right? And so the last thing that I want to encourage you to do as we kind of wrap up today's episode is really think about the environment that you are setting. We can take this from both a family and a business lens. When we think about, the influence consistent leadership will have on your home life, it is immeasurable. It is immeasurable because what you are doing at home is you are shaping human minds to go out into the world, right? You are shaping human minds to become ideally productive citizens that contribute to the world. And so, because of that, we want to make sure that when we are, teaching or instructing, even if, they may not directly be your children, if people in the neighborhood, if kids in the neighborhood just like to come to your home and hang out because you have such a welcome, positive home, such a great, vibe is in your home that people just want to be around you, making sure that you continue to cultivate that type of environment, because it really encourages other people and gives them a baseline of what it's supposed to look like, right? Not everybody, and this is something I didn't appreciate till I gotten older. Not everybody comes from that environment that is positive in nature. Not everybody comes from an environment that, is helpful and is full of, collaboration and understanding. Like, not everybody has a home life like that. So if you are in a position where you can, rethink the way you are structuring your home, right? Like, what could you do better in your home to make your spouse or your partner or your kids, like, to make them prosper and do better in their life, whatever that looks like for you, whatever that feels right for you to institute into your home. But just making sure that we keep that positivity, that open communication in the home. It is so crucial to making sure that we have a consistently positive environment. And if we take that example into the workplace, what does a consistently positive work environment look like, right? It looks like doing things to improve employee morale. I know for me, with my team, I like to have monthly 30-minute game sessions via Zoom because we are a remote team. We are, based in different places in the US and in the UK. I love for us to just have 30 minutes where we're just on Zoom and we're playing games. We, have done simple things from like Zoom itself has like a marketplace where you can like download different games to play, like Heads Up, for example. We've hired external companies to kind of come in on our monthly game sessions and kind of present a game to us. Like we've done a slew of different things together, but I just find that those type of small activities, especially when you work in an environment that is very, high tense, high stress, um, can definitely help improve employee morale, right? And outside of that, I'd say whether you have bi-weekly or weekly touch points with your team, like those are crucial. Like, do not underestimate the power of throwing 30 minutes, 15 minutes on someone's calendar just for them to be able to talk to you about what's going well in their position. Do they feel as supported as they need to be? Like what can you do maybe as a manager to ensure that they feel heard, that they feel seen, that they feel comfortable, right, in that position. There are a ton of things that you can do as a manager or even just as an employee, right, to ensure that you have better insight into your team. And if you're not a manager, and if you're just a 9 to 5, if you're an employee and you're just listening to this, and by employee, of course, the manager itself is an employee. I want to be clear, but I just mean an employee that doesn't have anyone like reporting to you. Um, if you are in that position, as a better term would be an individual contributor. If you are an individual contributor and you're listening to this podcast, I'd recommend bringing some of those solutions to your manager, right? It looks great to be able to be on a team and have your team members bring you solutions to say, hey, maybe we can institute this, right? Maybe we can, make this happen for our team since we are remote. Maybe a monthly game session, because they are, for at least for the ones I plan, they are free. Like we don't pay for those. Like something like that. It's simple, and it just allows people to really get to see one another in a different light, because of course when you reach out to someone, 9 times out of 10 it's always like, hey, I need your help with X, or can you look at Y. But it would just be nice to kind of get together, and just kind of play for, again, just 30 minutes a month is how we do it on my team. It's just a nice fun activity. um, and then when we think about, of course, some examples of just some outstanding leaders, I do want to point out a couple. Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, he is, I'd say, widely regarded as a consistent leader. He had unwavering consistency in his pursuit for justice, equality, and reconciliation. We can see in Nelson Mandela that he held a vision of a non-racial democratic South Africa, that he was willing to sacrifice his life and spend 27 years in prison in order to make sure that he was able to create a society based on equality and human rights. What really led Nelson Mandela was his consistency in upholding those moral principles, even in the face of adversity. And that is crucial, that we do not waver in the face of adversity, whether the adversity is coming from your home, coming from your manager, wherever it's coming from, that we do not waver. And of course, lastly, Nelson Mandela consistently included people with different backgrounds and different viewpoints to help in building the nation. He really worked hard to make sure that the bridges were, any bridges that could divide them, that they were, paved over, that they, build, that they were able to build a consensus, that they were able to really promote a sense of belonging across all South Africans. And so Nelson Mandela, of course, is just one example of a leader that really demonstrated consistency in his values, in his decision making, and in his communication. And that is where we get the widespread admiration and respect from, because we can have leaders who are steadfast and consistent with their principles, their visions, and really striving towards their common goal or their common purpose, which leads us back to the organization. Again, making sure we just have people that are around us, because they are striving together with us for a purpose. And of course, the last thing I want to leave you guys with is just a verse from my favorite book. Today's verse is going to come from Proverbs 11:14. This is the NIV version. It says, "For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors." Right? So, again, have wisdom and discernment. When you take from that scripture, make sure that you know your advisors that you're getting your counsel from, and making sure that, of course, in everything you do, you seek counsel from God first, prior to, seeking counsel from other humans. But that's all I have for you guys today. I know today was like a super long podcast episode, but I really do hope it was helpful for you. You were able to get some small nuggets throughout today's podcast that will, help you drive that consistent leadership in your organization. And remember, as always, consistency breeds mastery, and mastery transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of The Key to Consistency. Wherever you are listening to this podcast, it would mean everything to me if you could rate it, review it, reach out to me on Instagram. Would love your feedback, would love to hear anything you like, anything you don't like. Please feel free to share this episode with someone that you think could benefit from it. And until next time, bye guys.